You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Studio Chojin Raw. Today, I am joined by Reverend Jim. How are you doing, Jim?
I'm doing all right. Just sitting back, relaxing. Looking forward to talking about some monster movies.
Yes, we're going to be talking about Godzilla vs. Kong.
Yes, I still can't get over how much was in that movie.
So what did you think about it? What are your general first impressions of the movie?
First off, I can say this without any doubt in my mind. That movie is absolutely bananas. And I don't mean that in any kind of ape joke way. Like, I saw the trailers and I was expecting a good time, and I watched it and I had a good time. I did not expect it to be that crazy.
Which part in particular do you find to be that crazy?
The carrier and the big set piece on there. The carrier that's been holding Kong on there, where he's all chained up, and then it goes into the big set piece of Godzilla vs. Kong on the carrier, and then it just escalates from there. I look at the carrier and I think, how much money did that cost to make that? What kind of physics is it breaking to work? How much government money went into all of this to transport the giant bipedal ape from Skull Island to Antarctica? And I'm not saying this in any kind of derisive way. I'm saying this with a big smile on my face because I love that kind of insanity. It's the kind of thing I see in old comic books from time to time. You read an issue of Superman and suddenly he produces a small Superman out of his hand, and he's doing all more of what regular Superman can do but faster. I don't know where you think of ideas like that, but to do that and keep it grounded somewhat in reality like Godzilla vs. Kong, it absolutely amazed me to the point, what was it, Kong playing hopscotch on the ships. It just jumps from the destroyer to the carrier, and the carrier doesn't break in half, and then Kong and Godzilla are fighting on it. I am convinced that the movie makers, they got themselves a kid, gave him toys, and just told him, go crazy. We're just gonna watch, which I'm sure doesn't sound creepy at all.
Like, not only are Godzilla and Kong standing on that aircraft carrier, but there is a huge amount of space between them, and there's space behind them. So, like, this has to be the biggest aircraft carrier in, like, the history of aircraft carriers.
They're on the USS Flag from G.I. Joe. That's what they're on.
So the plot of Godzilla vs. Kong, it takes place after Godzilla King of the Monsters. And it's after, obviously, whatever, like 20, 30 years, or more than that, like 50 years after Skull Island.
Yeah.
And Kong they have him, like, confined in, like, this research facility in Skull Island.
Yeah, they kind of have Kong in the Truman Show, only in this case, it's all inside Skull Island, but they put a big old dome over it, computerized sky, and Kong is just poking holes through the dome.
I'm assuming they're doing that to keep him safe from Godzilla, because Godzilla's wandering the Earth, killing all the rogue titans.
That's what they did say. They did it to keep Kong safe. I keep missing the dialogue where they say that the other titans were getting taken out by Godzilla. I hope that's not true.
In, like, the first movie, like, you know, that was his role. He restored balance to the world.
Well, yeah, and do they classify King Ghidorah as a titan?
Yeah, he was like the other apex predator that Godzilla's ancestors fought.
Yeah. And the idea of Godzilla kind of roaming around fighting other titans is perfect Saturday morning cartoon material.
One thing that struck me is they got Kong in that little, like, research area. And is it perpetually daylight in there because it's nighttime outside? If it's supposed to mimic the cycles of Skull Island, why isn't it nighttime? I know the reason why. The reason why it's daytime is because the filmmakers want to make it clear to the audience that this is a artificial environment he's in. But within the logic of the movie, why is it daytime when it's still nighttime outside? You're not even supposed to do that with your fish, leave the light on. That drives them crazy. So, like, this poor animal, he's living in this endless day.
He just wants to get a good night's sleep, and they have the artificial sun just beaming down on him the whole time. No wonder he's as grumpy as he is. I get where you're coming from. I didn't get the feeling that Skull Island was going through its night phase at that point. I think there's a bit of dialogue that says that the island itself is just getting constantly buffeted by these enormous storms now. And I assume that that's probably what's been blocking out the sun from that island and causing the ecosystem to kind of collapse.
Even a storm during the day isn't that dark. Like, it's gray.
True. It's Then again, we're also talking about Skull Island, which is like cartoon Bermuda Triangle territory, so physics don't work right there to begin with.
So then, as Kong is locked in this research facility, Godzilla is now going to different cities and he's destroying, it seems like he's destroying cities, but we actually find out he's actually targeting the Apex Corporation and their facilities.
Yes, complete with Umbrella Corporation style commercial to introduce you to them in the movie. It throws you right into the deep end with just, all right, we're about 5 minutes into the movie, we're gonna throw Godzilla Attack at you.
I think that's awesome. I love that sequence where he comes out of there and he's swatting the jets. That feels like vintage Godzilla.
And he seems more aggressive even than your normal Godzilla movie. He's moving very quickly. They even point out that he's constantly flashing his intimidation display. But seeing him, you know, swat planes out of the sky, he's blowing up everything with his atomic breath. There's a certain satisfaction I get from it. Maybe it's morbid to say that, but it was so cool to see that done in a big Hollywood way.
So then what we find out later on is that the Apex Corporation is they need like a certain element. They're searching for a certain element that could be only located in the Hollow Earth.
Yes.
So then they go to Alexander Skarsgård because he has theories about the Hollow Earth and they want him to bring them to the Hollow Earth, but then for some reason they need King Kong to lead them to the Hollow Earth.
Yeah, Kong's natural instincts will be able to help lead them to Hollow Earth somehow, but the way to get Kong to follow those instincts means they have to bring him to Antarctica where that opening to Hollow Earth lies, which is why we have to now put the giant ape on a big carrier and hope to God that the boat doesn't sink.
There's one part where Alexander Skarsgård said to the woman who's like the Kong researcher, he says to her, Skull Island opened up from part of the Hollow Earth. So you would assume there would probably be some kind of entrance to the Hollow Earth on Skull Island.
Yeah, that surprised me as well. Then again, in Skull Island, I don't think they ever allude to anything involving a Hollow Earth connection from Skull Island to down there. If I recall some of my Hollow Earth theory readings, and by that I just mean reading a lot of comic books, usually the entryway to any of those Hollow Earth points usually lies at either the North or the South Pole.
They bring him to the Hollow Earth, and then, spoilers, we then find out that the reason this Apex Corporation wants Kong to go to the Hollow Earth is because the element they need, they want to use that to fuel Mechagodzilla. And Godzilla is not actually evil. He is targeting these Apex corporations because he knows they're building a Mechagodzilla.
Part of that has to do with the construction of Mechagodzilla. It turns out to make Mechagodzilla work, they somehow have to wire his mechanical brain into the actual skull of King Ghidorah. And somehow they thought this was a good idea. I thought the idea of them having it get wired into the skull of King Ghidorah, again, it goes into that idea of just complete bonkers.
First off, let me say I love the movie. I thought the movie was awesome. But there are decisions that they make in this movie that are kind of baffling. If you would have just made one little change, even though it still would have been crazy, there would have been a logic to it. So they have the skull of King Ghidorah, and the DNA in the skull is powering Mechagodzilla psychically. And it's like, okay, like it would have been so much easier if they just had King Ghidorah's brain.
Yeah.
If they had his brain in a jar with electrodes to it, then you're like, okay, this makes sense. There's a logic to that. But then for whatever reason, they decide, oh no, it's the psychic DNA in his skull, which is just so crazy. And then even when they're in the Hollow Earth, it turns out they don't actually need the element that's in the ground because they're going to scan it and then they're going to synthesize it. Somehow they could digitally synthesize an element they've never had.
Yeah, I noticed that on my second watch through that they didn't even take a sample, they just scanned it, maybe take like one little bit and analyzed it, and then they tell the head of the Apex Corporation, Bob Evil, they tell him, all right, this is what it's made out of. He says, okay, that's good, and I guess maybe he types those elements into Mechagodzilla and that powers it? It's like Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in 1991, where if you start paying attention to the time travel and the logic therein, that movie falls apart. It's just a matter of like, all right, here's the story, just roll with it, and as long as you don't ask any questions, you'll have a good time.
What I really like about this movie is that this movie is the sign that we are going into the era of the absurd Godzilla. Because, like you were saying, the plot doesn't really make any sense if you think about it. This shit is so crazy, and even the fight between Godzilla versus King Kong it's a wrestling match. It's not any kind of fight any two kind of animals would have. And one thing I really like about this movie, especially with King Kong, because it kind of is more of a King Kong movie, is that it does humanize the characters. And so like that fight sequence, even though it's digital with CGI characters, it does feel like those suit fights from like Godzilla versus Megalon.
I wouldn't necessarily go so far as like Megalon, because Megalon, that whole era, and I'm not disagreeing. I do think there is clearly a progression with the Godzilla movies that they've made so far, where you start off serious, you go to, okay, things are getting weird in the second one. We are going absolutely out of our mind with the third one. And each one kind of represents a different era of Godzilla. I would say King of the Monsters is in that in-between with Invasion of Astro Monster and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster.
King of the Monsters feels more 90s to me, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I think it feels more like Heisei era Godzilla. I would say like Kong versus Godzilla to me is almost more Showa, I think.
I'm definitely not disagreeing with you as far as Godzilla vs. Kong feeling Showa. I can see how you think that the 2014 one is more Heisei era. I can see that. I still think it's a little darker, maybe like specifically like 1985.
If Charles Dance in King of the Monsters was an alien, if they revealed at the end of the movie or during the movie that Charles Dance was an alien and Ghidorah was sent to Earth by his race hundreds of years earlier to destroy the world and they were there to awaken him, then that would have been 60s Godzilla. But there was an element of Godzilla King of the Monsters that felt a little bit more reserved, where it didn't feel so over the top. It did feel a little bit more grounded, which is why I would say it was a little bit more 90s-ish. But without a doubt, I think Godzilla vs. Kong is much more ridiculous than Godzilla King of the Monsters. It accepts the absurd nature of Godzilla, and it's not ashamed to just be unabashedly stupid. And even though we're having fun picking apart some of the details, like that's not what this movie's about.
No, absolutely not. You can tell from the trailers, it's just sit back, relax. We're just gonna watch monster fights and we're gonna have a good time.
Which one do you like better, Godzilla vs. Kong or King of the Monsters?
Godzilla vs. Kong. I gave it a rewatch before you and I recorded, because I went in thinking about King of the Monsters, and I think Godzilla vs. Kong has it beat in a few ways.
I think King of the Monsters is a better Godzilla movie. I think Godzilla vs. Kong is more of a King Kong movie with Godzilla in it.
Yeah, he does feel like an afterthought in it, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think I like Godzilla King of the Monsters better just by virtue of the fact that it feels more like a Godzilla movie, and it just, to me, it feels like something that could have been ripped from the 90s. What I like about Godzilla vs. Kong, and where I think Godzilla vs. Kong improves over King of the Monsters, is I think the pacing is a lot better. A lot of the fat that's in Godzilla King of the Monsters is trimmed out of this movie, so it flows with no problem. And I think the fight scenes are better lit. There's a lot of cool colors, especially when they're fighting in Hong Kong. That carrier sequence that's like sunset looks really great. I mean, the one thing I didn't like about King of the Monsters was how dark a lot of the fights were.
Yeah, I get the desire to, make things look very moody and apocalyptic like they did in King of the Monsters, but part of the reason that we watch these movies is to see the, I don't want to call them intricate movements, but you want to see what the monsters are doing in the fights. Kong is jumping from building to building, each one lit, and he and Godzilla act out these very, not choreographed, maybe not even intricate, but these very specific sort of moves. Kong will grab Godzilla and tries to pry his jaws open like he does with a T-Rex, and immediately Godzilla counters that by just blasting his hands with his breath for a moment. So Kong puts Godzilla in a headlock and just tries to wrangle him and smash his head into a building. Godzilla throws him down. Suddenly now Kong grabs his axe and starts swinging it at Godzilla, which, by the way, the axe that they find for Kong, I don't know how else to describe it, but when Kong finds that axe, he's Conan.
Yeah, basically.
He picks up the axe that you see him have. He finds a throne in Hollow Earth and sits down with the axe in his hand, and at that point, Kong is Conan. They take Kong and turn him into 3 different action stars, actually, in that movie. He does the John McClane but jump off of the carrier as Godzilla blasts it. He sits down on the throne with an axe in his hand, looking like a giant ape version of Conan, and then in the final battle, his shoulder gets dislocated decimated earlier by Godzilla. But to go and join into the final battle, Kong pulls a Martin Riggs from Lethal Weapon, smashes his shoulder into a building, and now he's ready to rock and roll, you know? What was it? They used John McClane, they used Conan, and they used Martin Riggs on Kong. I can't think of a better combination.
Well, that's why I feel like this movie is almost like, you know, I mean, it's not exactly like Megalon, but it's that kind of movie where the monsters, they're people. They really humanize these characters, and it does kind of harken back to the old guys in suits, and that's what this fight feels like. I mean this in a good way. It doesn't really feel like two monsters fighting. It feels like two guys in monster costumes fighting, and I think that's even emphasized with a lot of the close-ups. You know, we see a lot of facial expressions from King Kong. There's a scene when Godzilla's shooting Kong and he's laughing when he hits him.
I'm glad you bring it up because I also watched the 1962 version of King Kong versus Godzilla, and boy, the way they, I don't want to call it anthropomorphizing exactly, though it does have shades of that, but they have very clearly defined personalities. Godzilla is just this big asshole walking around Japan knocking shit over. Kong, on the other hand, is, I don't want to say he's like Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino, but you see him on the island, he saves the islanders from a giant octopus, and what's the first thing he does? He finds a large bowl of berry juice, starts drinking it, and passes out drunk on the beach. Meanwhile, when Kong and Godzilla see each other face to face, Godzilla starts being an asshole to Kong, and you can tell he's clearly laughing at him. And Kong himself, even though it's like these more static faces for the suits, you can tell through the movements, alright, Kong's thinking of something. He's planning out a tactic to use against Godzilla while they're fighting at Mount Fuji. Whereas Godzilla is just trying to search for him, but he doesn't know quite where he is. You can tell just through their movements that these are more clearly defined personalities than just wild animals fighting each other. And I think that's one of the strengths to Godzilla vs. Kong. Those close-ups, as silly as they may be, Godzilla getting that kind of like Freddy Krueger slasher smile, I thought that was a little much. At the same time, I won't lie and say I didn't enjoy it.
This movie does feel like it's more of a sequel to Skull Island than King of the Monsters, but even though I think Kong is the de facto main character, I think Godzilla has the best moments in this movie. Him laughing is, you know, one of those sequences. And I like the fact that they did give Godzilla a little bit of a personality, because that's something that was missing from like Godzilla 2014.
I like Godzilla 2014. I can understand how all those teases for finally seeing him, it can get frustrating. At the same time, when it finally comes to the big money moments, he's there and every movement that he makes counts. I remember a friend of mine saying that one shot where you see him through the smoke and he's just turning around just as he's about to face the Mother Muto. A friend of mine told me the way he moves, he looks like an old samurai. And I always love that visual. And every time I look at that shot, I think of it. I think he has a bit of a personality, but it's in the sense of like that more stoic samurai kind of character. Whereas in Godzilla vs. Kong, he's clearly, this brings up another thing actually that I wanted to ask about, but I'll preface it first. The way Godzilla acts, he's clearly being influenced by something. So in the movie, they say that pretty much Godzilla defeats Kong. That's the big thing that they point out. I guess we've already spoiled Mechagodzilla, but I guess we can spoil who wins. But I don't quite give the win to Godzilla. What Apex Corporation has been doing has been setting Godzilla off to the point where it's like, you know, you're playing Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy and you equip one of the characters with Berserk, and suddenly all bets are off. He's just gonna go and tear through anything. It's clearly got him feeling more aggressive almost.
Well, I feel like the MonsterVerse Godzilla is kind of a Godzilla that just doesn't give a shit. He has a goal and he's going to accomplish that goal by whatever means he has to. The MonsterVerse Godzilla is kind of like Zack Snyder's Batman, where he just, you know, like he has a mission and he doesn't care how many people he kills, he's going to complete his mission.
I'm just imagining Godzilla threatening Jared Leto now and telling Jared Leto he's gonna fucking kill him.
In this movie, they do have Godzilla standing over King Kong the way Batman stood over Superman, but this scene was much cooler.
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. And it also leads to that just great shot of the both of them roaring at each other.
Godzilla vs. Kong, it delivers on the promise made by the first movie, because the first movie ends in a draw, and in this movie, it ends with a definitive winner. But what I also like about this fight is that it's kind of booked like a wrestling match, where Kong jobs out to Godzilla, but Kong beats Mechagodzilla. So even though Kong did the job, he still comes away looking strong.
I was thinking about that when I rewatched it yesterday. That I definitely had that thought going through my head, and I definitely thought the same pro wrestling thought that you had. One of those things about pro wrestling, it's simple, it works, it's very, very effective, and it lends itself to a lot of different storytelling ideas, and I think they used that pretty much to the perfect extent in Godzilla vs. Kong. Like you said, Kong taking out Mechagodzilla, while Mechagodzilla had been throwing Godzilla through everything in Hong Kong, definitely shows that same mentality. It's part of what makes it a lot of fun, and then, again, you have these very clearly defined personalities from the monsters. The only thing that's, I guess, not all that defined is Mechagodzilla, but you're also talking about a giant robot kaiju with a megaton punch.
What did you think about the design of the new Mechagodzilla?
If there is a big complaint I have with the movie, it's how Mechagodzilla looks. He fits the function of the movie, he fits in the monsterverse, but it's probably my least favorite Mechagodzilla design. And again, I don't say this in a way that's meant to be critical. That Mechagodzilla in Godzilla vs. Kong works for that movie. I don't really have a problem with it one way or the other, but if you ask me to rank it with the other Mechagodzillas, it's probably towards the bottom. My favorite Mechagodzilla design would be Kiryu from 2004, specifically in Tokyo SOS.
Yeah, that's the best Mechagodzilla.
Absolutely. It looked like that perfect combination of the Heisei and the Showa era, and they just, they put a little bit of, anime shine on it, and now it just looked so cool to me, and it still does.
This new Mechagodzilla, I think he looks okay. I'm not the biggest fan of it. The thing that kind of bothers me about it is it's that kind of American design aesthetic of just too much unnecessary detail, where they have to texture every part of his metal. It would look cool if he was just almost like Kiryu, just bolted steel, and you just had the silver shining there. But there's all this like ridges and like stains, and it's just overly detailed. It just distracts from the overall design. I actually feel like that design would look a lot better if you just smoothed some of it out, and just simplified it a little.
What you're talking about is a problem I've had with a lot of, I'll be specific in one case, I look at the Gundam series and everything's just so blocky. I miss 80s anime designs for the mechs where it was just these streamlined, really cool looking, sleek kind of deals,
Yeah, just simple. Keep it simple, which is why I like the designs in Pacific Rim 2, because they do kind of look like big toys. That's what they should look like. They're big robots. I wish they would have simplified the design. You completely stole what I was going to say. Kiryu is the best Mechagodzilla design. Even the design in Ready Player One, which I wasn't that big of a fan of either, I feel like is at least closer to what Mechagodzilla should be, where it is simple, steel-plated. You're not overly texturing the whole character.
I can agree with that. I don't dislike the design in Ready Player One, but I feel it's kind of a lateral to the design in Godzilla vs. Kong. I would have bet money that they were going to use the one that was in Ready Player One. I think Ready Player One was released by Warner Brothers, right? So they probably could have done something to get that design into the Monsterverse.
I do wish that Charles Dance returned in the movie. I was hoping they would have Charles Dance return and he would pilot Mecha King Ghidorah. But I'm assuming because Ghidorah was the villain in the last film, they kind of felt it probably would have been redundant if they made Mecha King Ghidorah the villain here, so they opted for Mechagodzilla. But I really wish Charles Dance was the guy, who is operating Mechagodzilla.
Yeah, I think bringing Charles Dance's character back in would have lended it a little better towards having some connective tissue to King of the Monsters. I think his character could have easily been put in there. He could have been the pilot for Mechagodzilla instead of getting the dude they give him the last name of Serizawa, which kind of bugs me, but that's a minor point. I think it would have been better suited to have Charles Dance pilot it. He looked like a guy that wanted to go and fuck shit up.
The guy's supposed to be Serizawa's son, and the fact that Serizawa's son is just randomly a bad guy and it's never touched upon, I think that's an issue with the movie, especially within the continuity, which is just Dr. Serizawa was a good dude. Why is his son a bad guy and he's working for Apex now?
Wait. That was supposed to be his son?
Yeah.
Okay, I had no idea there. Truth be told, the guy's kind of an afterthought in the movie.
That bugged me. The fact that they never address, did Serizawa and his son have a falling out? It annoys me that they killed off Ken Watanabe, because I felt like he should have been like Miki from the Heisei Godzilla series, where he should have just been in every movie as a supporting character. He could have been the connective tissue to all these movies, and it bugs me that they killed him off. But then, okay, if you're gonna bring in his son, because maybe you don't want to pay Ken Watanabe's acting fee, why is he just just not a scientist like his father? Why is he working for the bad guys and operating Mechagodzilla?
Yeah, I don't know why they decided to kill him off in King of the Monsters. I really enjoyed his character, and I do kind of like the idea of, and I wouldn't necessarily have done it with Serizawa, but, you know, the idea of the sun goes to the dark side while the, you know, that whole crap.
If he was still alive, that could have been a really interesting plot point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if they put a little more focus on Rin Serizawa being his son, that would have been something. At the same time, the more I'm thinking about it, could you have seen Ken Watanabe being serious Dr. Serizawa in the middle of Godzilla vs. Kong? Because it seems so incongruous to the rest of the movie. Like, he's almost too serious for that movie.
No, I can see that because, I mean, King of the Monsters, I mean, even though it wasn't as ridiculous as Godzilla vs. Kong, it had its elements of being kind of silly. And even the human characters in this movie, they're not overtly goofy. They're playing it pretty straight. With the exception of the villain, the guy he was the dude in Machete with the split personality. I forget the name of that actor. He's hamming it up. He's definitely like kind of mugging into the camera, but I feel like everybody else is playing it pretty straight.
I feel it gets goofy more often than not when it's Millie Bobby Brown, the guy from Deadpool 2, and the other dude. It gets dangerously close to turning into a Michael Bay Transformers movie, but it never reaches that level of obnoxious. It's definitely toned down compared to anything Michael Bay does, obviously, but it gets very, very close to the point where I start getting very uncomfortable when, you know, even in the establishing character moment of the one dude where he's going on, oh, don't eat the apple. Oh, here, I grew this hand lotion here. Oh, look at this, I found this in my toaster. It gets so close to being, like, I'm not gonna lie, when he was going on like that, I'm just like, oh no, he's not gonna be one of the main characters, is he? Thankfully, they show that it's just an act, but it gets really close to me being like, oh god, oh, alright, no, we're fine.
I agree. The stuff with Millie Bobby Brown, it felt kind of tacked on. It was really unnecessary. She really didn't need to be in the movie. If they were going to put her in the movie, I wish they would have kind of did like a Gamera Guardian of the Universe thing and made her kind of like a Sagi, where she has like a connection to Godzilla. That would at least justify her being there. I mean, it would just be ripping off Gamera, but at least it would make sense as to why she was there.
I absolutely agree with you. If you went with the Asagi kind of connection from Millie Bobby Brown to Godzilla, and I would even say that there is the barest hint of it in Godzilla vs. Kong, in the sense of she's the only one that's like, no, something's up with Godzilla, something's not right here, we just have to find out what it is. The fact that she's even defending him speaks a lot, at least as far as like having someone in Godzilla's camp. On the other side of the coin, do you think that the characters that are there in Hollow Earth with Kong, do you see them as, like, the Millie Bobby Brown stuff could at least be described as more entertaining? Do you think that the group that's with Kong and Hollow Earth kind of felt like they were just there?
No, because I mean, they have a reason for being there because they're trying to find that element. Even though they're not the most interesting characters in terms of the way they function in the story, there's a logic to it, and they're bringing Kong to the, you know, I was going to say the cursed earth, to the Hollow Earth, and that's what's going to lead to the fight with Godzilla in Hong Kong. So structurally, it makes sense. I feel like you could take Millie Bobby Brown, you could edit her scenes out of the movie, and it wouldn't make a difference.
True, very true. Do you think that, in the same sense as Asagi and Gamera, the little girl that has that connection with Kong, do you see something that could be played around with there as well?
That would be cool, because now it's almost like Gamera versus Iris, where you have the two people with the two connections to the monsters. And you could use that in this movie, where you have these two monsters who are going to fight each other, and now you have their two kind of human avatars that contrast each other. That could be interesting, but then I guess you'd be rewriting. The movie would have to be a completely different movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Considering what they did, they made the best movie they could with it. As much as I love the idea of the two avatars of each kaiju going at it, I think that that would almost make things too serious.
I like the tone for this movie. I think the tone fits. I like that it's a fun, over-the-top, ridiculous monster movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes, because it's going to get progressively crazier. Because so far, every movie has been crazier than the next. So where this goes from the future, I'm looking forward to. I like the introduction of the Hollow Earth. It actually kind of reminds me of the Earth, URTH, from Primal Rage, especially that big chamber Kong is in. Like, it looks like a place where you'd have the bikini girls, like, worshiping the giant monsters.
I was thinking World of Warcraft, like Kong suddenly in Draenor and has just found his epic drop with the axe.
So in closing, like, what's the best part of the movie? what's the worst part of the movie?
I keep going back to the fight on the carrier, and not just because it breaks physics, not because of whatever criticisms I give it, or whatever reasons that I love it because it's bonkers, that sort of thing. It's the carrier sequence, because I would have thought of that as a kid. Godzilla and Kong fighting on an aircraft carrier, punching each other, clawing at each other. Kong gives a good shoulder shove to him and knocks him off the carrier, and then Kong leaps from one ship to the next, that sort of thing. I would have thought of that as a kid, and if I had seen this movie as that kid, it probably at that exact moment would have been the greatest movie I've ever seen. Worst is actually kind of difficult just because there's not much to dislike. It's the kind of movie that just kind of puts itself out there and said, look, this is it, take it or leave it. It's not going to lie to you. It's not going to try and pretend to have any big lofty goals. It's just there to go and be spectacle. If I have to choose a worst thing, I would probably say the Mechagodzilla design. Again, I don't say it in a way that it's necessarily a negative. It fits that world. It fits it. It makes sense, as much sense as the movie can make anyway. You put it perfectly. It's kind of over-designed. It needed to be a little sleeker, in my opinion, but then maybe you might risk making it look too cool.
I agree. I mean, for me, I think the worst part of the movie is the fact that I think they could have taken a little bit more care with the human characters. Like, we can explore Dr. Serizawa's son a little bit more. We can justify Millie Bobby Brown's existence in the movie. I realize it's a movie that's just about two monsters fighting. I think the movie overall delivers on that, but that doesn't mean, you can completely ignore these characters. And there are ways to integrate them into the plot that feel a lot more organic. And they did that a lot with the classic Godzilla movies like Monster Zero, where those movies were all about setting up these ridiculous fight sequences, but the human characters felt organic and necessary. They didn't feel tacked on. The more I think about the whole Serizawa's son, he should have just been a random guy. It's kind of insulting now that you would take this dude who was the champion of Godzilla in the previous films and then make his son a bad guy for no reason. You don't even have a line where he's like, I hated my father. He was never there, or something like that. Like, he's just randomly a bad dude for no good reason.
Yeah, it absolutely should have been Charles Dance piloting the, I almost said King Ghidorah. It should have been Charles Dance piloting Mechagodzilla easily. It certainly would have made the little stinger at the end of King of the Monsters make a little more sense.
I'm glad we are getting to the point with these American monster movies where we are embracing the over-the-topness, the ridiculousness of it all. I'm hoping this continues because I definitely want to see where it goes in the future. Do you think if they make a sequel with Godzilla, do you think we'll see Destroyer?
I was actually talking with a friend about that. He had suggested to me, bring in the space monsters. We've already had Ghidorah. What you have next, bring in Gigan, bring in, I suggested Space Godzilla versus Kong, which I'd be all over that. And I would probably throw in Destroyer just like, because you can even leave it open there for Destroyer in the sense that, like, all right, all that radiation in Hong Kong, it's got to affect wildlife and such. Easy enough to go and write that in.
They've already established the Oxygen Destroyer and King of the Monsters, and I feel like next to King Ghidorah, Destroyer is the next big Godzilla villain, and I'd love to see him in these movies. I'm still holding out for Baggin to be in these movies. People make fun of me because I'm the last person who still wants to see him in a movie.
It's funny, I still see like fan-made maquettes of him. I still see pictures of that. I still remember playing Super Godzilla on the SNES and thinking like, boy, that'd be cool to see. I'd be curious to see how they could pull it off. I think at this point he's become such a meme that it's he's become such a meme that they probably won't ever do anything with him unless it's a fan-made thing.
I was gonna say, I think the next logical character, if they don't go with Destroyer, you have Biollante as like the ruler of the Hollow Earth.
Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot. That'd be a lot of fun. You can even throw in, say, Varan and Baragon or something like that.
I think this wraps up our conversation. Reverend Jim, my brother in the clergy, I want to thank you for coming here and talking to me about Godzilla. Thank you for participating in the video.
I'm always here for good monster talk, and I'm always here to praise be to Godzilla.
Indeed, I share your sentiments. This week's question comes from That Nerd Guy, and That Nerd Guy writes, "Hey Reverend Paul, I have 2 questions for you. What are some modern comic book / manga you've been reading? They could be mainstream or indie. For example, I've been reading books like Immortal Hulk, Once and Future, My Hero Academia, and Murder Falcon. 2, would you read a Super Sentai styled Batman comic? Have a nice Easter." Thank you, That Nerd Guy. Thank you for sending in a question, and I did have a nice Easter. I hope you had one as well. What modern comics have I been reading? I'm actually taking a comic book writing class, which is actually pretty cool. The teacher for the class was an editor for DC Comics back in the 80s, and because I've been taking that class, I've actually been reading a lot of American comics, so I really haven't had a lot of time to read much manga right now. But within the last couple of weeks, I read Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman, I read Criminal, The Last of the Innocent, Bone, Gail Simone's Batgirl, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I've been doing a lot of reading of American comics. All the titles I listed off I thought were pretty cool. I wasn't that big of a fan of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World was a series I never really got into. The characters in Scott Pilgrim always felt like people who I wouldn't hang out with if I knew them. But I mean, it is a fun series. It's just a series that's not for me. I really love All-Star Superman. I think it's up there with Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow as one of the best Superman stories ever written. And Grant Morrison really gets into the heart of who Superman is as a character. The thing that defines Superman is not his strength or his ability to fly or his super speed. The defining aspect of Superman is his wholesome values and his desire to save everyone. And the struggle Superman has to deal with is the fact that he can't save everyone, and that's something he has to reckon with. And the cool thing about All-Star Superman is that it kind of explores the idea that what if the one person Superman can't save is himself? And I think that book is really great. You mentioned you're reading Immortal Hulk, which is a book I just picked up recently, and I'm looking forward to checking it out. I like the idea of that book, the idea of bringing the Hulk back to his roots of being a monster and taking the Hulk and telling a story that's more of a horror story and not so much a superhero story. I'm really looking forward to checking that out. I also picked up the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle book, The Last Ronin, which I've heard a lot of good things about, and I'm looking forward to checking that out. But yes, I've been reading a lot of American comics lately. The writing class I've been taking has been really helpful. It's actually helping me a lot write my own comic that I'm working on. I'm working on a comic called Breast Gladiators that I am constantly plugging on this channel. But yeah, that's what I've been doing lately when I'm not recording these videos. And would I be interested in a Super Sentai styled Batman comic? Yeah, I mean, in general, I guess I would. I mean, I think you'd have to specify, like, what do you mean by Super Sentai styled? Is it Super Sentai styled in the sense that it's Batman and it's just regular Batman, but it's presented like a Super Sentai styled comic? Or is it Super Sentai styled like the way the Japanese Spider-Man is Super Sentai styled, where, you know, it's a completely original story and Batman is like an alien from the planet Batula, you know, and he has like a morphing belt that he uses to transform into his costume, and he has a giant bat robot that he operates, you know. I mean, is it that kind of Sentai styled? Both of which I think would be awesome. I think if you turned Batman into Power Rangers, that would be pretty cool. Even though I think they kind of already did it with Batman Ninja and that fucking crazy giant mech fight they have at the end of it. And I really enjoyed Batman Ninja. So yes, more of that would be pretty cool. So once again, That Nerd Guy, thank you for sending in a question. And if you have a question you'd like to ask me, or if you'd like to make a suggestion about a future topic, or if you'd like to complain about something I said, if you think some of the shit I said is stupid and you want to call me out on it, feel free to send me an email and I would be happy to read it on this show. Just make the subject raw, and you could send me an email at studiochojin@gmail.com. So, once again, this wraps up this week's edition of Studio Chojin Raw. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I want to urge you to join the Unholy Army of the Night and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel, you could always leave a comment, hit the like button. If you feel so inclined, I have a Ko-fi account. You could always donate. If you can't donate to the Ko-fi account, you could always just watch the videos and send good vibes. Any way you choose to support the channel is greatly appreciated. So, once again, this is Reverend Paul saying, until we meet again.